Okay, this is a podcast for Standard 6.1, and here we're going to be taking a look at what ecology is, and then we're going to take a look at types of things that will influence population sizes. So we will be able to identify population, and we will describe factors that will influence the size of a population. Before we do that, though, we are going to go over in general what we're going to be talking about in this unit. So in this unit, we will be looking at the interactions among organisms that live in a certain area and the interactions that they have with their environment. So not only just the animals that live somewhere, but how the animals and plants and whatnot use each other and the non-living parts of their environment in order to survive. So we're going to start by talking about the levels of organization of the Earth, basically, and this is what we're going to be breaking down over the next couple of weeks in this unit. So the largest level of organization when we talk about ecology is the biosphere. The biosphere is all the combined portions of the planet. So it's all of the life, every single type of living thing, all of the land that they live on, all of the water that they use, and the atmosphere that you breathe. So think about the atmosphere going all the way around the outside of the Earth, and everything from that atmosphere on in is part of the Earth's biosphere. Remember, bio means life, so it's any parts that are going to help to sustain the life and the life itself that is found there. Now, within the biosphere, we can break down the Earth into biomes. Biomes are geographical regions that have ecosystems that have the same kind of climate and dominant communities. So communities are just the kinds of living things that live there. So you can see there's a lot of different types of biomes across the world. And they all have similar types of things. So all this orange area is desert, so it's very dry, low rainfall, and you'll see certain types of organisms that can live in these types of areas. So we take the entire biosphere and we can kind of categorize it down into biomes based on the climate that is present in that particular area. So next up we have an ecosystem. An ecosystem includes all the organisms that are living in a particular place with their non-living environment. So basically in this picture we have a lake ecosystem. It's all of the living things that are found in this area together with the non-living parts. So you've got the water and the soil and everything that is needed for these living things to survive. Those are all part of the same ecosystem. So when we look at an ecosystem itself, we can then break it down into the living and non-living parts of the ecosystem. The living parts of the ecosystem make up the communities. So these are all of the different populations that are living within an ecosystem, so all the different types of living things that are there. So it could be all the different animals that are there, all the different plants that are in that system. So like these types of animals might be found in a forest area like this. But you have communities, so it's all of the different living things that you would find in a particular area. Okay. A population is a group of individuals of the same species that live in the same community. So you have all these cows live together in this particular area, so they make up that particular population. Whereas this grass that is growing in this particular field make up that population of that grass in that place. You could have that same species living somewhere else, but they are not in the same population. So we're going to look at how we're going to define population. Next up we have a species. Remember that a species is a distinct group of organisms. They have to look similar to each other, and they have to be capable of reproducing. And remember, not just reproducing, but also making their own fertile offspring. So here are some more unusual types of species that exist out there, but there are millions of different species of living things, not just animals, but that includes plants and bacteria and fungus. So when we look at an actual distinct group of organisms, remember they are able to reproduce together, they are the same species. And then when we look at just one member of an entire species, that is your individual organism. So this is one butterfly that makes up the monarch species. Here's one mushroom. So typically when we think about an individual organism, you know, what happens to one organism is not necessarily going to impact the entire species. But what one organism does could impact the way other species survive. So we can take and kind of look at all of here. So our individual organism, they belong to the same population. That population is part of this community. This community lives within this ecosystem. Right? This ecosystem is part of a particular biome that is part of the entire biosphere. So it's just kind of a level of organization, kind of like when we learned how we classified living things, with kingdom down to species. All right, we're going to take a closer look at populations. Populations get characterized in three ways. The first is by geographic distribution. Basically, that's the location of the population, where it is. Population density, in general, is the size. And then we look at growth rate. Growth rate is how quickly that population will either increase or decrease in size. Okay, so we're going to take a look at each of these a little bit closer. Okay, we're going to start with geographic distribution. Geographic distribution simply is the area that is inhabited by a population. So if you look at this particular map here, all this area that is in green, this is all places where you would find the species of chimpanzee. So that's their geographic distribution for this particular population. And you could get even smaller. You could say, oh, well, there's the chimpanzee population of Nigeria. So you can get more and more specific as you look at it. But whatever place you're talking about for that population, that's the geographic distribution. And you have to have a place in order to have a population. You can't just say, oh, the population of butterflies in the world. It doesn't really work as well that way. Population density is the number of individuals per some unit area. Usually we do square miles or square kilometers. So it's how many people, for example, or whatever organism you're looking at there is per square miles, let's say. So in this particular graphic, this is human population across the earth, and you can see in places like India, there are areas where there are over 1,000 people per square mile. The average in the United States is about 25 to 50 people per square mile. So it just depends on where you are on the earth, how many people you have, how dense that population is. And that's how we would measure population density, is just how many there are in a particular place. All right, growth rate. Growth rate is the rate at which a population will increase in size. The way this happens is that you can either have more organisms being born than are dying, or you can have more immigration than emigration. So in the United States, an example of immigration, there was a large amount of immigration over periods of time, and so the population growth rate has increased greatly. Also, people tend to live longer, and so people on Earth, there are now estimate that there are 7 billion people on Earth, and the number of people is growing because we are managing to keep people alive longer. The growth rate, there's more births than deaths at any given time. And so that's another way that we can characterize a population, is by how healthy it is, by how fast it's growing. All right, so population size can be affected by the number of births. So if the number of births is high, you'll get an increase in population size. If the number of births is low, you'll have a decrease. Number of deaths, same idea. Immigration was new members join a population. So if you have a larger amount of immigration happening, you're going to get the population increase in size. Emigration is when members leave the population. And so if large numbers decide to leave at any given time, then the population will go down. Now, how much variation you see in population size depends on the starting size of the population. So if you look at the overall population of the U.S., it's stayed fairly steady over the last decade that they're showing in this particular graph. That's the gray line. This black line here is the overall population of California itself, excuse me. So it went down for a little while, and then it kind of went back up. And then remember that population is a little bit smaller than the United States. And then if you look at one town in California, you can see the population goes up and down a lot. And that could just be simply a family moving away or a family moving in. So things like that can really have a huge effect on populations when the populations are small. So in the next podcast, we're going to talk a little bit more about populations and things that will affect their size. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is we're going to go back to ecosystems for a second. So when we talk about ecosystems, there are two parts to an ecosystem. There are biotic factors. Biotic factors are all of the living parts of the ecosystem. Okay, so it's the actual ecological community. All living things that exist in that particular area are the biotic factors. So you can remember bio means living. So this little drawing here, all of the biotic factors are colored in. The plants, the animals, the trees, all of that kind of stuff, all of that is colored in. Those are the biotic factors. Now, those biotic factors would not be able to survive without the abiotic factors. The abiotic factors are all of the non-living parts of the ecosystem, things like climate, temperature, how much it rains, how humid it is, how windy it is, the nutrients, the soil, the sunlight, the water that is there, all of those things contribute to the abiotic factors. So again, same picture, but this time the abiotic factors are the ones that are colored in. So you've got the sun, you've got the ocean, there's the sand, here's the water in this river, the dirt and everything. These little white wisps that you see here, that's the wind. So these are all things that could influence the way that an ecosystem will work. So when you put those two together, you have a working ecosystem. So an ecosystem is all of the biotic and abiotic factors working together in a particular place. So the rest of the ecology unit is going to be talking about how the biotic and abiotic factors work together. So remember, abiotic, when you put A in front of the word, it means not. So abiotic is not living, and bio means living.